My wife and I were together for 20 years when a train derailed 2 miles from our home. It was full of chlorine gas, so when it crashed, a massive toxic cloud formed. We were eating dinner with our 17-year-old son, who was telling us about his day at school. The television was off, and our cell phones were in another room. Then we heard the sirens of the fire chief's car driving through our neighborhood, telling everyone on a megaphone to evacuate their homes due to the toxic chemical cloud heading right for us. Once we gathered enough supplies and clothes for a few days and got in the car, we realized that we were one of the last families to leave. Trash was split all over the neighborhood from fallen trash cans, and there weren't any cars in sight. After sitting in traffic for 7 hours, half expecting the cloud to come up behind our car, we finally arrived at Camp Rafiki. It was a summer camp for children, turned into a much-needed respite for hundreds of families. We were assigned 3 cots right beside each other, among a sea of other cots. We got freshened up, and were given any toiletries we forgot at home. Meals were cooked using the camp's kitchen. It really felt like a safe haven, but that feeling would disappear for me as soon as I remembered our home was simmering in a cloud of chlorine. I'd heard stainless steel appliances melt in chlorine gas, so I was devastated. It was going to be a mess in our neighborhood for a while, and I wondered where we were going to stay. My wife started playing the piano in the room for all to hear. There was a crowd of about 30 people around her, listening intently, and even more listening from across the room. She started playing piano as a child, so it soothed her and everyone around her. I could tell she enjoyed the attention, but I was just glad she didn't feel as upset as me. Our son was talking with a group of teenagers around the foosball table. Seeing my family so calm, and even enjoying themselves, suddenly made me feel calm. I went from stressed and tense to relaxed and desperate for some sleep. So I laid on my cot and passed out. I woke up hours later. It was dark outside, and it seemed like everyone was sleeping in their cot except my wife. Her cot was empty, so I took a look around. I found her sitting cross-legged on another man's cot. He was sitting on it with her, awfully close, while she was telling him a story from her childhood. I cleared my throat and asked her to come to bed. She hesitated, and it looked like she tried to think of a reason to stay, but there wasn't any reason I would accept to allow her to continue talking to this guy late into the night. I knew her extremely well by this point, so I knew she knew how bad it was that she was up talking to this guy while I was sleeping. Back at our cots, I asked her why she was talking to him and what they said. She was embarrassed and said it wasn't a big deal, they were just getting to know each other. I asked what she now knew about him. She just said it wasn't important and laid down to sleep. The next day, many of the survivors were playing volleyball or basketball, including me, my son, wife, and AP. After each game or point, I saw him high-five or fist bump my wife. She was starting it too, it wasn't just him. Then I saw her go in for a hug. He looked so pleased, but then he saw me glaring at him and walked away. She turned to see me and pretended nothing was wrong. Lunch was served, and with our plates in hand, my wife suggested we sit outside. She led our son and I to the table where AP was sitting. I thought about protesting, but I didn't want to have to explain why in front of our son. I just ate food and listened to what was said. AP mentioned it would probably be one more day at the camp before everyone could return home. My wife looked sad at the thought of going home. I felt super weird when she asked AP if he was ever lonely living by himself. I didn't know how she knew he lived alone. That must have been something they spoke about while I was sleeping. He said his dog kept him company, but he and I both knew it seemed like my wife wanted to keep him company. I stood up and told them I'd like to go on a family walk. My wife had the nerve to ask me if she could stay behind to finish eating. She only had peas on her plate, and her blatant disregard for me and our son was alarming. She was already choosing AP over me. I told her to come with us now, so thankfully she did. On the walk, with our son ahead of us, I asked her what the heck she was thinking. I had to point out all the obvious ways she was flirting with AP, and she still denied that she was flirting or misbehaving. I told her I didn't want her to talk to him anymore. She didn't say anything, but agreed. That was all I needed for her to respect my wishes, even if I was being overprotective. The next day, everything seemed to be going fine, but our son went off with some teenagers for a while. When it was almost time for dinner, I went to find him. He was hanging out by the tree line and really enjoyed talking to this one girl in particular. I was glad he got the chance to meet her. She was homeschooled in the very same neighborhood as us, but might have never met my son if it hadn't been for the chemical spill. He was feeling great about life, so I just told him to be back in a little while for dinner. When I got back to the building filled with cots and people anxious to eat, I couldn't find my wife. I also noticed pretty quickly that AP was gone too. I searched the crowded building and property around until I spotted them about 15 yards inside the tree line. There was a spot without so many sticks and brush. They were laying on a blanket, trying to stay out of my sight as I approached. I yelled to my wife that I could see her, and she was an idiot. With a raised, booming voice, I asked her what the heck she was doing. My emotions were level 10, but it was almost like I couldn't feel them. I was on autopilot on the inside because I think if my brain let me feel the full impact of this moment, I would have broken down. My wife stood up sheepishly, clearly ashamed of herself. When she got close to me, she said she was really sorry and wanted to go back with me now. I told her I couldn't just ignore the fact that she was just laying in the woods with AP. He was still laying on the blanket a short distance away, turned away from us, like he was waiting until I left to move. My paranoid brain was telling me he could have easily done something with my wife because she was only wearing a short dress. She didn't have much clothing resistance against foolish, spontaneous decisions. I stopped her from walking away and asked her if she just slept with AP in the woods while I was looking for our son. She said no right away, but she looked like she was about to cry. I asked why she looked like this, but she just ran away, back to the cots. I was getting extremely annoyed and refused to even speak to AP. My wife was acting like someone who suddenly had no idea how to behave like an adult. I decided as I followed her that she was at least having an emotional affair and consciously decided to sneak into the woods with him, where they may or may not have had sex. This was grounds for divorce, and it never would have happened if the train didn't derail. That night, as our son slept, I woke up my wife and got her to confess. They did have sex, but it only lasted all but 5 minutes, and she completely regretted it. They waited so long to go into the woods that it literally ended right before I found them. I can't explain how terrible I felt at this moment. I felt like my home was gone, and now my family was too. Then my wife added that she knew AP before this. She'd been over to his house to welcome him to the neighborhood, and a few other times when I was at work. I was fuming. She said they never did anything before this, but I found that very hard to believe because now, in an emergency situation with her own family, she slept with him. I went over to AP as he slept and whacked him over the head with his hardcover book a few times. He was alarmed. Then I had to make myself stop, so I just went outside to jog around the property. I planned out how I was going to separate from and divorce my wife. When we were cleared to return to our neighborhood, I told her I was going to file for divorce, so she needed to stay somewhere else. She bawled and cried and begged me to forgive her for our son's sake, so she could come home with us and help clean up the mess left behind, so our lives could return to normal. She said 5 minutes of meaningless, mistake sex shouldn't be enough to end 20 years of marriage. I told her it most certainly was, and said she needed to have a conversation with our son, explaining why she wasn't going to be living with us anymore. Our son despised her. He found it extremely hard to believe that I would just break up with her for no reason, which is all she told him. I didn't care if she planned to go with AP or what, but she did tell me she was planning to call her dad. 4 months later, the house I now share with my son was fully stored, with the melted appliances and wiring replaced. I'd told my son by this point what really happened, so he might be more prepared for his dating future. Obviously, he couldn't think of his mom the same way after that. He was hurt by her actions too, and he let her know about it when she called me in tears, asking to come back home. She hadn't contacted me or our son in that entire time, but she justified that by saying she didn't want to bother us. I told her I already knew from her dad that she didn't stay with him like she said, and as her husband, nearly ex, I deserved to know where she spent the past 4 months. She admitted she'd been with AP some of that time, but she just wanted to come home now. In reality, she'd been staying in AP's uncle's shed while his house was repaired. Once his house was ready to be moved into, he dumped her, because 4 months in a shed was all the time he needed with her. That's when our son grabbed the phone and told her he didn't want his father to take her back because he deserved better. Then he hung up on her, and I never answered her calls again. OP, your wife's behavior was extremely selfish, inconsiderate, and disrespectful. She found a single man and started talking to him like she was a single woman, even though you were always somewhere nearby. I can only imagine how upset and betrayed you must have been. I am proud of you for how you handled this terrible situation. You refused to go home with her because her behavior and decisions were unforgivable. She most likely had slept with this man before, and even if she didn't, there was still a connection between them that she never expected you to know about. Your son was right. You do deserve better than that. 20 years should have meant more to your wife. Her loyalty should have been unbreakable. I am glad you and your son managed to get through this together. I wish you both the best of luck and success in life. Thank you for sharing this story. Now let's get into our next story for today. At the age of 38, I still didn't have any children of my own. I was waiting until I knew I had the right woman and it was the right time. That's when I met my girlfriend for 2 short years. She was 34 and had 2 daughters from a failed marriage. She seemed like a woman who was reeled into a long-term relationship with a bad man due to an unexpected pregnancy and her mother's poor advice. I decided to continue seeing her, and the more we got to talk, the more I fell for her. She was incredibly smart and loved history. She read out loud to her kids every night and was going to school online to earn her teaching degree. Even though life threw her curveballs, she was trying hard, which was what I respected most about her. Things changed after her sister passed away unexpectedly. My girlfriend became overwhelmed with grief. She felt like she could die at any minute, and found it disturbing that all humans ever do is waste time until they inevitably die. She started talking more about the end of the world and clicked on any YouTube videos that mentioned potential war or weapon launches. At night before bed, she started saying she hoped I wouldn't die before her, because she wouldn't be able to handle it. She developed this fear of blood clots forming in her arms, legs, or neck, so she would jump up several times while we watched a movie or relaxed, just to march in place and move her arms around. I realized she had a problem, so I asked her if she'd be willing to seek treatment. She didn't want to go to counseling, but she did believe in God, so I suggested she ask the church for help of some kind. My girlfriend was skeptical she could handle any other weekly activity besides raising the children and doing online classes. I assured her I would watch her kids on the night she went to the church if they could make her feel better about life. She took my offer and told me they assigned her a weekly arts and crafts class to teach small children. She was really excited about it, and things started to get better immediately. She seemed more calm, and things stopped stressing her out as much. A few weeks later, though, something changed again. She was calm, but also less observant and sharp. Things that normally wouldn't have confused her suddenly did. She laughed out loud more often. She stopped marching in place, but would go outside randomly to walk around the house a few times. It took me a month before I went outside while she was walking to watch her. I saw her take a puff from a vape pen. She coughed a little. I immediately thought it was a medical vape cartridge, which wasn't legal in our state. I walked up to her and asked how she was smoking one of these. She was hesitant to say anything and tried to show me it wasn't what I thought it was, but in doing so, I discovered it was. I made a confident guess that each time she stepped outside was to vape without me knowing. She admitted it wasn't just for that, but she enjoyed the walking too. I asked how she was getting these cartridges, and she didn't want to tell me. She said it was no concern of mine, and I should just let her continue what she's doing because she feels better now. I took this time to mention that we hadn't made love in quite some time, so I was worried that she was getting love from someone else, and that maybe this person was also giving her cartridges. Her jaw dropped, and she denied this, but I could tell instantly that I guessed what was happening. She wouldn't admit it, though, and why wouldn't she? If she refused to admit it, she might get to keep living in my house with me serving as her free babysitter. I forgot to mention she was desperate for a place to live when we met, so I let her move in with me pretty fast. Now I felt like a fool, because she was up to something. I ordered a GPS tracker to put on her car. The next time she said she was going to her class, I anxiously watched her location on my phone. I was infuriated at this point, sure that she was taking advantage of me. I watched until she arrived at the crappy motel across from the cemetery. I asked her mom to come watch the kids and told her what was going on. She was surprised and didn't want to believe me, but she did come watch the kids. I got to the hotel and started filming on my phone. I banged on the door in front of her car and heard a scramble inside. When AP opened the door, he only had a towel around his waist, and I could see my wife's eyes peeking out from behind the bed. I told her I could see her and felt my heart twist like a pretzel. I asked if this was the guy she got her cartridges from, and he said it was none of my business. I snapped, screaming in his face that it was most certainly my business. AP just put his hands up and told my wife it was time to go home to Daddy. Outside, she told me she only lied to protect me and the kids because she didn't trust this guy. There were so many things wrong with that statement. I pointed out that she was a complete idiot for meeting this guy alone in a hotel room if she didn't trust him. Secondly, I said she didn't need to protect us from that guy, she just didn't want me to know she was sleeping with him in exchange for illegal drugs, all taking place while I watched her kids so she could go to the church. I screamed that she was just using me for a place to live, but I knew now that she was a horrible mistake. I didn't love her because she just proved she didn't love or respect me. She was selling herself for drugs. I left her there in the motel parking lot. I didn't care if she followed me, but she did. She heard me telling her mom and kids to get the flip out of my house. When they yelled in protest, I called her a lying cheater, among other truthful insults. Eventually, they got the gist and started packing their cars with children and stuff. While they did so, my girlfriend tried telling her mom I didn't want them to live in my house anymore because I was selfish and evil. I disproved that by showing her mother the video I took. Her mother was furious and told her daughter I should leave her after the extreme dishonesty and betrayal. It was just a short while later, while they were all living at her mom's house, that my ex was arrested on drug charges. OP, I am sorry your girlfriend convinced you to let her move in with her kids, only to prove she was a selfish and disturbed woman. She could have resolved these issues and sought help properly, but she took the route that would benefit her the most, without consideration for her kids or you. I don't believe she realized how important it was for her to avoid two major things: illegal activities as a mother and infidelity as a girlfriend, who depended on her boyfriend's trust and generosity. She ruined whatever chance you all had for a happy life together, simply because she couldn't handle her grief and mental obstacles in an honorable way. You have a second chance to find true love and have your own children. I appreciate you sharing this story as an example to our viewers. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to both stories for today. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care, everyone.